Be boundless.
Hi, welcome everybody to the next episode of Be Boundless. Today I'm going to start with a small story. The story is about an old man who was walking down a beach early in the morning. And as far as the eye could see, he saw there were starfish dotting the beach all the way down. Well, obviously, the storm in the previous night had washed ashore a lot of the starfish. And as he watched, he saw that there was a young boy who was running around at the beach, picking up one starfish after the other, and going to the sea and dropping the starfish into the sea. So he looked at the boy and said, "Hey boy, what are you doing?" So the boy said, "Sir, within 1 hour the sun is going to come up. After that the starfish are going to die. They have no way of getting back into the sea, so I am actually throwing one after the other into the sea." So the man laughed and he said, "You know, boy, the beach might be having tens of thousands of starfish. You're going to maybe be able to do 30, 40 starfish. What's the point? What difference are you going to make?" So the boy looked at him and said, "Sir, you may be right. For the 10,000 starfish, I may not be able to make a difference. But for each starfish that I throw into the sea, I'm going to save its whole life." And that story, when I read it, it struck me as a very powerful story. Each of us, and many of us in this call, are very privileged. And we have the ability to change the lives of so many people. If we can spare 5 to 10 minutes of our lives on a daily basis, the amount of change that we can make to so many people's lives is enormous. And so today I want to talk to an expert who has been doing this for a long time. He's a very good friend of mine. His name is Pankaj Rai. Among other things, he's the Chief Data and Analytics Officer of the Aditya Birla Group. But honestly, that's not what he's really famous for among his network. And his network is truly vast. He's known as the person who always steps up to support people in need. So Pankaj, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you, Ramji. Glad to be here on your program.
I'm so glad that I could have you, man. I mean, you're one of the most busy persons I know. Busy supporting and helping others, I'm sure. So I want you to sort of introduce yourself first, Pankaj. Can you do that?
Yeah, Ramji, these introductions are always hard. That, what is it that the audience might be interested in knowing about you? So let me take a stab at it. So I was born on the day Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. I think that's an important date, which was a giant leap for mankind. So after that, it was only downhill, as you can imagine. So I think early life was in a factory township in Gorakhpur. Dad used to work in a fertilizer factory. Next 25 years was spent in Delhi, working, studying. Briefly, I was in Chennai for 6 months, Singapore for a year, and then last 17 years I have been in Bangalore. And in terms of professional background, I think like many kids of our generation, including yourself, we were given two choices to become a doctor and engineer by our parents. And I became an engineer not because I loved engineering, because I just could not dissect an animal, or I couldn't just do anything much in biology. And then later on, all bad engineers realized that they need to do something else to get out of that. And MBA came to our rescue, so we all became MBAs. The good thing about MBAs was that they told us that there is no right answer. It depends, and anything could be right. And it was such a relief from the engineering mindset where there was only one answer and we never got it. So anyway, post that, most of us followed our own trajectory. I became a management consultant first, then a banker, and then got into data analytics. And here I am in front of you, Ramji. And these days I'm identified as a father, as a husband, as a son, as a professional, as a marathon runner, as a whatever, helping others. So I think different things to different people, I suppose. That's who I am, I suppose, and still growing.
Yeah, so you do have many facets, which are all fascinating facets. Apart from, you left out the analytics guru, by the way. So you are also now considered the doyen of analytics in India, I suppose, right?
I think the many a times, we do certain things based on a certain narrative that we create. But other narratives are also created by others. So I guess there are many such narratives around me. And yes, that is certainly one of them in the professional world.
Okay. So the question, so I'm going to sort of dive into the topic of today. The question I have for you, Pankaj, is how did you become the most helpful individual I have ever seen in my life?
Yeah, I think, it's always hard, Ramji, to say what did we become and how. And also, what is the phrase that you associate with that becoming? So, the phrase that you used was the most helpful person. So, I can tell you, I never set myself a goal of becoming the most helpful person. I don't even know whether that is the narrative that drives me today. So, I can tell you, what has driven me and who I am and why I am. And maybe that moniker that you attach to me is probably given by others. Certainly not something that drives me in that sense. I mean, there are other ways by which I think so. I think the easiest way to summarize what I have become is I don't know what was the context very early in my life when my father told me about something that, what, Beta, if you have any questions, just look at nature. Nature has all the answers because that has lived for billions of years. So somehow I don't know how you kind of remember certain such phrases told to you by someone, and over time I have realized that phrase has stuck with me. So one of the characteristics of nature, the way I interpret it, is that the nature is ever expanding. We look at this whole Big Bang theory, universe expanding, all that. So I would think that since it is in the nature of the universe to expand, therefore, in unison with that nature, it should be in our nature to also expand. And when I say expansion, not physically, but hopefully mentally. So to me, more of enhancing our perspective, enhancing my perspective, knowing more and more, and trying to have a more broader perspective about the world in general, about life in general, tomorrow better than it was yesterday. And the reason for that is I think the better or the broader our perspective is, whatever we do, then we include more inputs and more perspective in taking that decision. So I think what has driven me is to become more curious, therefore more compassionate, therefore become more convinced about what I am intending to do. So I think this approach has made me more sure of what is the right thing to do. Because half the time, we are all wondering what's the right thing to do. So to me, the right thing is the best I can do by continuing to increase my perspective, and within that, optimizing whatever decision has to be taken, because every decision has its consequences. And instead of taking a decision for your own self, which is the easiest, which we do as when we are babies, I think we need to do a much better job by including broader perspectives in life. So therefore, that is the driving force, Ramji, a slightly longer answer of doing the right thing, doing the karma as per my dharma, or, you can put any such moniker to it. That probably results in some of the other moniker that other people associate with. But to me, this is the moniker which works really.
So, Pankaj, that's a fantastic way of putting it. I think one of the things that you sort of did not explicitly mention is that when you're doing your karma and helping more number of people, I think your perspective actually widens because you get to know many more people, you get to interact with people, and each person, new person that we interact with, we get a much wider perspective, right? I mean, about what they are going through, what their life is, and we become better people for it. That's the way I have at least felt it.
No, absolutely. In fact, like I was saying, that in my pursuit to have a broader perspective, those perspectives can be brought in through reading about things or by interacting with people. Now, unfortunately, I'm unable to read much, but I love engaging with people. So therefore, the single biggest perspective enhancer in my life is engaging with the same people on different topics, or new people on any other topic. So therefore, that whole networking or the giving theme that you talk about, while it is giving something to the other, it is also enriching me and enhancing my perspective, which allows me to do more. So to your point, the way I look at it, it is a symbiotic relationship that both parties are gaining something meaningful from each other. And therefore, I don't relate to the giving moniker because I think I'm getting as well.
So that's
to me, it's a
okay. I think that's a very good point. I'm going to come back around to that a little later. because that's a very valid point. The giver actually gets as much as the one who gets. But let me just step back a bit, and I want to actually share why I became, I also started going on this path of trying to give as much as possible. One was, of course, actually emulating you, Pankaj, and thank you for that. I mean, you've been a sort of fantastic role model on this particular aspect, and I really want to thank you for being that. But apart from that, I mean, I was pretty much wrapped up in myself for the first decade plus or 15 years of my career. My ambition was to really become the fastest to reach a global Fortune 500 company CEO status. And I was driven, I was ambitious, I was going after that. And that's when this autoimmune disorder struck me, and then I was completely paralyzed, right? I mean, even though it started off in a mild form and slowly progressed, there was a viral fever which spiked the condition, and I was absolutely and completely paralyzed. I could not move hands or feet. I could not even move my fingers. I couldn't keep my eyelids open. And that time we were in Gurgaon, and my wife was completely petrified. She didn't know what to do. So she called up a contact of mine, a doctor in Cochin, a neurologist that I had met earlier. She had his contact, so she called him. And he said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to speak to a doctor I know in Delhi. And then he spoke to the doctor in Delhi, and then that doctor in Delhi connected to a colleague of his who is a neurologist in Delhi. And this lady, Dr. Monica Thomas, my wife spoke to her. Now, Monica Thomas, it so happened that she was staying in Gurgaon but working in Delhi. And my wife kept talking to her, and she tried to explain and tried to figure out what are the symptoms and what to do about it. And then for about a couple of hours, she was not picking up her phone. And my wife was really panicking. And this was about 9 o'clock in the night. And at 9 o'clock, we got a call saying that Dr. Monica Thomas has just left her hospital in Delhi. She was driving back to Gurgaon. Before going to her house, she's going to come and drop in at our place. At 10 o'clock in the night, she comes to my home, and she finds me almost completely paralyzed. And she quickly examined me, and she said, this is Guillain-Barré disorder or an acute case of CIDP, which is my condition. And we need to instantly hospitalize him. Now, there was no way we could get an ambulance at that time. She called a driver up. She and her driver together put me on a wheelchair, pushed me into the car. She took me to the nearest hospital in Gurgaon. She waited till the doctor, a neurologist, came and met me. She told him what her diagnosis was and made sure that I got admitted. After that, she left. So she sort of disappeared from our lives. I keep calling her up every once in a while and thanking her. But this act of a person who had no connection to me, there was no reason for her to have done anything for me, and she didn't get anything out of it. But she saved my life that night. So I realized how important it is for each of us to spend that extra hour in our life to support others. After all, I believe we all live in this great society where there are so many people who are supporting our living in so many different ways. And this least that we can do is to keep helping people so that we all feel as part of the society where everybody's role is to support each other. Have you had any such...
I can offer a data analytics view on this topic. So I have often wondered, and in our field, we are supposed to look at data and make some conclusions. So to me, it's a bit of a surprise, and you'll probably relate to it. Whenever we have spoken to anyone in our vicinity, and if someone has helped someone, 100% of the time they'll tell you they felt good about it, and it was a good experience. We also know that not all the time people will say, in fact, many times they'll say, I was trying to do it for myself, but after getting it, it wasn't as if that is what I wanted, right? So I think data around us tells us that, when you work for yourself, it is not necessarily very satisfying in the long run. We've seen that. We've heard that. Anecdotally, we have enough data. We've also seen the other data that whenever you help, you're 100% okay. Unfortunately, despite that data, we are talking about that, people should help each other. So I'm unable to reconcile the data on the ground that everyone is aware of and the action on the ground, which also everyone is aware of. So I have to tell you, that is the biggest issue. And that's why I tell people that, but why would you not do that? That seems to be the right thing to do. We all have the data. So I have to tell you that is the biggest question that I haven't been able to figure out an answer to. Maybe I think the only explanation I have so far found is that, in the evolutionary process, we have all lived through scarcity, and people who had to survive, the survival of the fittest, somewhere they had to take care of themselves. So it is possible that some of these things are biologically wired in our brain and we can't help it because that's how, evolution has forced us that take care of yourself, otherwise you will die. Maybe that is the only explanation I can find, that it's an involuntary reaction. It certainly cannot be based on the data we see around us. So I'm hoping people will change behavior based on their real lived experiences and seeing what goes around.
So I think there's a conflict of evolutionary forces. There's also the evolutionary forces which make us social beings. So, human beings would not survive unless we are social beings, right?
Yeah.
A baby takes a few years to start being productive, and it's a society which protects a small baby. So, at the same time, as you said, there's also evolutionary pressure to fend for every individual for themselves. And I suppose that's the reason that it happens. You actually, I know that you devote some time every day sort of to answer calls, and you sort of fix slots where people can call you and ask for help. And I've seen you actually doing that and connecting people, etc. So can you tell me a little bit about that? How did you reach this stage of perfecting the art of giving time for support?
Yeah. I think all of us focus our time and attention on things that we value more, right? So all of us have what you can call some dead time, which is sort of your me time, and you could do pretty much anything with it. And, one of the dead time is in, sort of getting ready in the morning to go to work and, stuff like that, or you're in the car getting to the office, or you are at the airport. So there is enough of that dead time, me time, where you can do pretty much anything. And depending on who you are, I would see people reading books. Some other people will take a nap because they couldn't get good sleep. Someone else might check on WhatsApp. Someone may call family, whatever that is. I think most of my dead time goes in talking to people, because that is where I think I derive the maximum energy from, the maximum perspective from. So if, to give an example, I'm coming back from Bombay. I'm landing at the airport here at 9 p.m. I know that I'll get home only by 10:30. So I'll tell my friends who I haven't spoken to, hey, you know what? I'll be driving back home from 9 to 10:30 p.m. On Friday. If you're free, why don't you give me a call? Another one, and I know that this call is likely to last for half an hour. I say, okay, by the way, 9:30. Third one, 10. So I might actually end up doing 3 calls in that 1.5 hour ride, or even more sometime, depending on what the context is. So I have sort of figured it out that all of that dead time is allocated almost naturally without so much of thinking, that I'm already, talking to different people for different times. And because that's, like I said, is the most important thing I have prioritized after my sleep, if I can say so.
So the one thing that I've realized is that among all the professionals that I have met, I think you have one of the largest network of friends. And whether it is your professional network, your classmates, your classmates' classmates, your friends' classmates, your relations' classmates, whatever, right? You are part of almost every group I seem to know. And the groups where I have no idea how you are part of, And I think as professionals, one big advantage that we get is in networking. But what I've found is that when you network, and the whole sole purpose of networking is to get something for yourself, it just completely defeats the purpose, and people start sort of keeping away from you. Whereas you, on the other hand, I think the only way I have seen you using a vast network is to actually just connect people who can benefit from each other. And you've done that so many times.
Yeah. So I think,
So is that
I think, one has to again start with, what is it that you want in life and what is your own objective function that you want to optimize. And like I said, many a times it is quite natural for everyone to optimize their personal objective function or some such thing. And there's nothing wrong in it. I think maybe when I was younger, I also felt I should get promoted quickly or get an increment quickly. That's just natural Maslow's hierarchy. But maybe at some point in time, I reflected and felt that maybe some of those things are not as important to me than they are to some other people and things like that. So I think I have been driven by that motto that if I don't have anything meaningful that I want for myself, why not at least leverage this network to help other people get something for themselves? And as someone in the middle, I see myself as a node. I think as a node, I get a lot of insights. And those insights, one, are personally fulfilling because to me, they add perspectives to my worldview. Two, those perspectives end up then, helping other people in different ways, which then sort of fuels itself. So to me that, I've maybe once spoken to you about this 5C framework, which was derived based on this was curiosity, leading to compassion, leading to conviction in terms of what you want to do, leading to creativity, and then communication, and that communication then leading back to your curiosity. So this whole 5C circle, which is a kind of a positive spiral of continue to expand perspective, continue to add value, and doing it over and over again in a larger concentric circle is the way I think about life.
Is that a model that you have developed, Pankaj, or is it a
so
model?
in brief, I have spoken about it, written about it. I think the way it came into being was 5 years ago, and my elder daughter Pragya, she was going to go to college, and my wife said that she should tell her what she should study. I mean, that's natural that what subject should she study and all that. And I said, there's no point in telling her what subject she should study. Maybe there is merit in sharing with her some characteristics or some things that I have learned for myself, and passing on that framework would be more useful than just the subject, because frankly, I have no idea which subject will work well for us. So that made me thinking, and then I kind of derived a framework. See, the framework comes from my MBA background, because all of us know that frameworks have to be created, 4P, 7S, all that. But the derivation came from my engineering background. I said, how can I accept a framework if it has not been derived from first principles? So in brief, the 3 C's that initially I came up first, I spoke about compassion, conviction, creativity. So the first mega trend in our life was, this whole globalization, which created so much value world over. GDP grew, everything grew, all of us got good jobs, all of that. So I think that globalization created a lot of value, trillion-dollar companies, billionaires, all of that, but did not sort of equitably distribute that new wealth creation. It sort of remained concentrated, Ginny index. Right. So I therefore foresee the next wave of deglobalization, and deglobalization not meaning that we'll go back to our caves, but that will reduce, because people are saying, hey, while value is getting created, a lot of number of people are poor, people are losing jobs. You look at the US, they will tell you that since the 80s, the average person hasn't necessarily gained. Factories have disappeared, lower paid jobs have come into being, all of that. You look at any other country, that's happened, and that's also given rise to more Atmanirbhar type or insulated philosophies in many countries, more strong arm leaders. The rise of nationalism is a impact which is creating this deglobalization, in my opinion. So therefore, the future probably belongs to a more deglobalized work for these reasons. So that is the sort of the supply side. Now, what is the demand side? So this derivation is based on economic principles of supply and demand. I think the demand is exactly the opposite. Every large global public problem, terrorism, global warming, whatever, has to only be solved through collaboration and compassion. There's no other way you can solve it. You can't solve it on your own. Every private sector problem we already see are ecosystems, platform economies. No one is, maybe Apple is a walled garden, but pretty much everyone else is creating an ecosystem. So I think the demand in the world, both in public and private sector, seems to be more collaboration and compassion. But the world seems to be looking inward. Every individual is looking inward, country is looking inward. So maybe the thing that is in short supply and high demand should be compassion. So that's where the first C was derived from. That, you got to be compassionate. Be that hedge fund manager, take the contrary view, be compassionate. so I've derived compassion from a purely sort of economic principle and not an altruistic principle. The second one, really the compassion, and then this whole world which was very fraught of choices. We had very few choices. We got one, whether engineering or doctor or forensics or Colgate. So it was a supply constrained economy, and now we are in the area of abundance. Now, anything that you do you are unable to sort of feel good about it because there is something else someone else has done or you could do. Because there's so many choices. So I think our mental model of the
Right.
past, which was based on external trends, because the world was driven by scarcity, you could look at external trends. Between engineer and doctor, take one. There is no fifth answer or 10th answer. Today, there are 500 answers. Same for toothpaste, same for cars, same for every other choice. So in a scarcity driven world, the mental model automatically has to be based on trends because you are driven by what is available. Now we are in abundance. Everything is available. Now what do you do? So the answer cannot be found outside because everything can be done. So the answer has to be found inside, which is the second C, which is your own conviction. But we haven't trained anyone to develop their own conviction, to reflect, to figure out what is it that we want to do. So I do think that the first C, which is compassion, which is thinking about everyone, thinking about everything, can give rise to your own conviction on what is it that you want to do in this whole world. And it has to come from the inside. It's almost like saying there is no career path for you outside. The career path will be whatever you want to create because every path is available. Which one do you want to create? Now, that's not how people think, but if you think about how the world is, that conviction should lead to this thing versus, so instead of looking outside, look inside. That's the second C, which is again based on, in my opinion, the mega trend that I am seeing. The third C, which was creativity, was derived based on the linearity of the world. We all thrived in Six Sigma and all of that. And Toyota said we can do continuous improvement. We can beat Ford and General Motors, and they did. But then Tesla came along. So now the world has become far more multidimensional. So instead of continuous invention, continuous improvement, we have to do continuous invention or reinvention and so on and so forth. So the third C, therefore, which is required, is the creativity part. Just the one single line of continuous won't do. So that's how I kind of derived this 3C model for my daughter to say, you've got to be compassionate. Hopefully we should give rise to your own conviction on where do you want to play. And when you are in that mode, you will be creative because then you are in the flow. So this was the 3C. And then later on, 2 years later, I asked her, she'd forgotten. So I said, I need to enhance this framework, make it a better framework for it to stick. Which is when the other two C's were added. When I say, okay, you start with curiosity because you are not going to be compassionate if you're not curious. And once you have become creative on the last end, communicate, talk to people, release a product, get feedback. And that feedback will fuel your curiosity back again. So this is the summary of the 5C that was created. And later on, I said, hey, this is not just relevant for her. It's relevant for all of us. And on some deeper reflection, thanks to my friends, I felt that I was probably doing it anyway without knowing it. So maybe that framework was born out of my own confirmation bias, if I can say so, because that's the way I was anyway thinking about it. So that's a slightly longer answer to your question, Ramji.
Very nice. So maybe hopefully down the line you'll write a book.
I don't know. I've given talks. I've written some articles. That's the maximum I think I can do. I'm too lazy to write a book.
Lazy you are not, but
lazy to write
maybe
a
lack
book,
of time.
not lazy to run a marathon. So again, everyone chooses where do they want to be lazy and where they don't want to be lazy.
So coming back to this, right? I have also, the advantage that I have in life is that I have played so many different kind of roles. So I have been, first of all, my background from IIT and XLRI has given me some interesting networks. Then I have worked in the computer industry. I have worked in education industry. And then after that, I have had a huge bunch of doctors I have had to interact with because of my illness. Then I went on to become a science magazine editor, an educationist, consulting at the Azim Premji Foundation. So I've had a huge network of social people who are working in the social sector, people who are educators, people who are scientists. And then 2 years I worked in COVID relief through the foundation, and I was leading the strategy for COVID relief at the foundation. And that gave me an opportunity to interact with large number of doctors, infection specialists, and scientists, WHO people, all kinds of people. So I'm in a very unique place where I also am a co-founder of a startup. So I have a network in the startup space and the VCs, etc. also. So I'm in a unique position that I can actually use your principles, Pankaj, to connect so many different people and help them in some way or the other. And I thrive in this, So just 2 days back, actually, I had this great opportunity to save someone's life in some sense. So there was this lady who had an abusive husband, and she left that marriage, and she had to support her family, as in her parents, etc. She sold whatever she had and got some money, and then from Gujarat she came to North Karnataka to do a course in nursing, and she completed the diploma, and then she got all the certificates from the college, but the course completion certificate they did not give her. Now she cannot find work without that course completion certificate. So she kept asking them. They said, no, it is been sent from the board. It's not reached us. Then she had to pay money to a tout to try and get that from the board. He ran away with that money. So she was completely at her wit's end. She went back to Gujarat. She couldn't work. She didn't know what to do. Then she came across a very interesting young person from Unilever who was doing some work there. And that person then took up the cost. That she started calling up the college to find out. After a few tries, the college sort of hung up on her and they sort of ghosted her. Then what she realizes that she had a senior who's a very activist kind of a person. She called up that person and spoke to her. And the senior of hers is a very close friend of mine. And she spoke to me knowing that I have some connects in the medical space. She spoke to me and I was able to use the colleague of mine to reach out to the principal secretary of medical education in Karnataka. And within 5 minutes, his personal secretary called up the board and got the certificate out, and the certificate has reached that lady, which is incredible, right? I mean, so many people have actually spent a little bit of their time, which is, I mean, finally, there's 5 minutes maybe I spent on this, or 10 minutes I spent on this. I spend so much more time on doing mindless browsing. And that 10 minutes has saved somebody's life. And hats off to that young girl from Unilever who picked up the cause. And she just kept pushing and made it happen. So one of these days, I'm going to get her and her senior, both of them, onto this same podcast, because I think grit is something, again, which is so important. And they both showed so much of grit to make this happen. So I find that I felt so happy at the end of it, right? And this was my starfish moment, actually. And my entire drive over the last 7-8 years has been just to do this. Every talk I give, I deliver so many free talks to school to help students. And I believe that it actually, in some way, if I can make a small difference to the way they are, they're more positive, they take downturns or setbacks more positively, looking for solutions. If I can make that happen, I might actually end up saving a few lives around the place, metaphorically speaking. But that's been really my purpose. So I'm sure you have a lot of interesting stories like this, Pankaj. Do you want to share a couple of those where you managed to connect people and help people?
Yeah, I was reflecting on my own stories. I was listening to your story. I think the sort of one difference that I find, probably, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, in the way you describe, or maybe the way you approach, and the way maybe I have, when I look back, approach, is that, I have played a role, in saying, like I said, do the right thing and whatever. Most of the time, I don't know the consequences. So I have made some difference to people, and sometimes someone say, oh, you know what, 9 years ago, that happened and you helped me. And I had no idea. I can't remember those people and all that. So many a times at that moment or at that point in time, whatever is in my, possibility that I can do, I do that. And then I sort of move on. So I have no idea what the impact of some of those actions are. And I'm actually quite happy and comfortable with that. In fact, many a time people tell me that, you had connected me with so-and-so who took your name and spoke to me. Do you know what happened? He or she was looking for a job. And I said, actually, no. They asked me for your connection. And after that, they haven't spoken to me. So I don't know. So many times I don't get to know unless someone tells me. But I'm quite happy and content in trying to have done, what made sense at that point in time. I think I can give you another anecdote to kind of highlight the way I think. So when I was in Dell, and you were there as well, many of us were called upon to share our thoughts on what is it that drives us, what is our purpose in life, this, that, and the other. And I don't know where I had read, but I had read a certain anecdote which was called the coffin test. If you imagine you're lying in a coffin, Who do you think will show up and what will they say? And I found that idea quite fascinating. So I remember 10, 15 years ago, I used to take some sessions in some of those leadership lessons that we were called and said, let's do this hypothetical coffin test and figure out what does it tell us. So I would start, of course, by telling them what I think about my own coffin test and then invite them to share what they thought, because that will give you some pointers to what is it that you value. And by the way, I've done that session over many years, and my answer has changed. So I do want to share with you those reflections and what the answer initially was and what the answer has now become, which will give you some insight into my own lessons that I've learned about myself. So initially the lesson used to be, as you would expect, oh, you know what, lots of people will show up and they say, hey, this guy is a great guy. You know, whenever we sought help from he helped us. So it was a bit of that type of an answer that lots of people feeling good about, my help and all of that. And over time, my answer had become, actually, no one will show up. Because now that WhatsApp is there and travel time is included, they can just write RIP or maybe write a nice note, oh, so and so help me and all, and then move on to the next WhatsApp group. Now the question is that the answer to the coffin test has changed. What does that do to your own way of life and the way you operate? And the answer actually was nothing. Nothing changes for me. It didn't matter whether 1,000 people showed up or no one showed up, because the satisfaction is that in my own understanding, I did the right thing that was possible to be done. I did my best. So I think that's the sort of insight that I have gained about myself through some of those experiences or experiments that I have done in those public sessions. These days, people don't seem to call me for such sessions, and I haven't repeated the coffin test example in a long while. But I was reminded of that when you asked me that question. So that's one other way to think about it, Ramji, on reflecting about your own self.
So what you're saying is that you have completely moved up the Maslow's hierarchy. You are now at self-actualization stage. And also, you're sort of following what some extremely wise person said about a few thousand years back, which is karmanyeva adhikarasya ma bhareshu katachana.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a narrative that seems logical to assign to what you just heard. But I don't know. These are things that maybe this is how I was always. I have just discovered it now. I don't know that answer. But if I were to hazard some answers, not necessarily based on data, but just looking at my parents, my mother and my maternal grandmother, who I was influenced by, they were very similar. So it is quite possible that it is either genetic or there is some nurture element to it, and it has just been passed on, and that is my fitrat based on my sort of environment in which I grew in. I don't know. I can't assign a reason, but I can only draw some correlation. Causation is always hard to establish in many of these things. So if I were to look at who I am today, maybe some of the hardware elements can be assigned to my dad, because he went to IIT and made sure we went to IIT. Some of the software elements on the way I behave, my worldview in life, can probably be assigned to my mom. At a very high level, I can probably assign those causations if I have to, because those correlations certainly exist. Anyone can tell me that.
So as a parenting coach, the one of the strategies that I tell parents to inculcate the right qualities in children is role modeling. And obviously your mother has role modeled this very well. And I'm sure that has definitely impacted. I mean, genetics maybe, but a large part of it is also nurture. And I'm sure that role modeling by her has
role modeling also, Ramji, is very, sometimes, again, people interpret a different way. I think, you are who you are. It's very hard for you to become a model for your children, what you are not. So when people say that, how do you lead people, or who's a leader and who's a follower and all of that, my response is the only one individual you can perhaps hope to lead is your own self. And if somehow you have achieved some success in that, everything else will follow.
I think this is a very, very valid point and very hugely philosophical discussion, which we can have maybe over a bottle of beer somewhere down the line. Today, I think this can go on for a couple of hours, actually. So I'm going to sort of bring this to a slightly more pointed help for the people who are hopefully watching this or listening to this. I think many of them could be youngsters who are new in their jobs and early professionals, etc. they may not fully have reached the level of self-actualization that you have reached, Pankaj. And so I'm going to give them a bit of a, what is the benefit of doing some of this? Having strong connects in the society around you, whether it's professional, whether it's personal, and strong bonds is essential for mental well-being. It's essential for success in life. Because the more stronger the bonds that you have with people around you, the more physically and mentally most happiness you get, and more physically healthy you become. There is enough research to prove that. Apart from that, professionally, people who have strong bonds are the ones who get supported by their colleagues, their peers, etc. And hence, they become more successful at their work. So it's important to have strong bonds. I don't want to call it network because network sort of sound very trite. Strong emotional bonds with people around you. And to ensure that happens, the best way to do that is to continuously keep helping people who you come in contact with. On my side, I have I now sort of dedicate some time to helping people. I seek out people to help. I reach out to people who need help even without them asking me. I think that has individually, it has made me feel far better about myself. And I think one of the reasons that I call myself the happiest person I have met in my life is because of this. So Pankaj, any last word from your side?
I'm more inspired by, let's say, Gandhi, who did his experiments with truth, or there are several other spiritual gurus who guide you to find your own path. So I'm one of those things which I also say that just like I experimented and invented my 5C formula, which I can resonate with, relate with, all of that. I think you also experiment and find your own formula, because all of us are designed differently. All of us may have a different fate assigned to us, but can we determine what that is? And I think the only way to determine that could be through experimentation and reflection and so forth. So my own view is that I think reflection and thinking about it and figuring out what makes sense for us is the best thing. I do think that the world has become quite different from what it was before. And therefore, one of the words that we were all, we have celebrated a lot, and I think it has been abused, was the word called go-getter. We were all told that we ought to be go-getter, and so Sharma ji's son is a go-getter, and so's daughter is a go-getter, and so should you. So if they could get into IT, you should, and all of that. So I think that go-getter is something which is very firmly entrenched in most of us, because it stands for excellence, it stands for, pushing hard and getting ahead and all of that. But I think it has led to a lot more selfish behavior also, which may not have been the intent, but that has become an inadvertent, outcome also. So I would say that can we all start to associate ourselves more with being a go-giver? And when I say giver, is not necessarily in a very philosophical or altruistic sense that you just give away everything you have. I think I would use Gordon Gekko's language, which is what people understand these days, to say you can be long-term greedy. So if you give more and you engage more and you form a broader network, I think you will have more fuel in your tank to last longer and do more and for a longer amount of time. So I do think that, to me, this go-giver strategy is the long-term greedy strategy that all capitalists should also adopt, and not just the altruist who might anyway be driven to adopt that. I think that to me, the go-giver is a extremely capitalist strategy as well, which is not often talked about. And I also think that if you look at, I just give the example of a bank account. Only when you put something in it can you withdraw it. So only when you give into it can you get out of it. So I do think that's the moral that I will take away, that's how the world seems to function. And if you have to be more aligned to the world, then you ought to be a giver, because you will get your more than fair share over time. But that giving mentality, if it is missing, then you are probably running on an empty tank. So that would be my message, Ramji.
Thank you, Pankaj. I think that is wonderful chatting with you. So let me just summarize what you finally said. Be a go-giver. Bank goodwill into your bank account so that you can draw it later if you want. And to me, the only way to be boundless in life is to help as many people as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
If you like what you heard, subscribe and keep up to date with the Be Boundless podcast.